Allowing non-citizens to vote in local elections suffocates liberty by making governments larger and more powerful, National Review Institute senior fellow Andrew McCarthy told Fox News Digital. The New York City Council on Thursday passed a measure allowing some 800,000 non-citizen residents the right to vote in local elections. The measure now goes to Mayor Bill de Blasio's desk. Progressive Democrats push for non-citizen voting because they would like to solidify a permanent Democratic partisan majority, McCarthy, the former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, said. They reason that if they champion voting rights for aliens, then aliens will support them. Democrats are the party of government. If aliens are permitted to vote and do so in support of Democrats, the government will become larger, more intrusive and more redistributionist, McCarthy added. The bigger government becomes, the more it suffocates liberty and crowds out private investment, meaning funds would increasingly be allocated based on political favor rather than economic efficiency. That is how you kill a prosperous society. As McCarthy noted in a November editorial published in National Review, no New York City mayoral candidate has received 800,000 total votes since Rudy Giuliani in 1993. So, even if a fraction of those non-citizens eligible to vote did participate in local elections, that fraction could have significant electoral consequences. Non-citizen voters would benefit Democrats if their support from U.S. citizens continued to erode due to such issues as crime, underperforming and politicized schools and inflation, McCarthy said. Additionally, if the populations of Democratic cities grow, states could be entitled to more representation in Congress and, therefore, more federal funding, he argued. The legislation could also open the door for non-citizens to run for local elected positions, the former assistant U.S. attorney added. It is a bedrock principle of constitutional systems that legislation cannot amend a constitution, that can only be done by constitutional amendment. But, again, if a legislature is going to ignore the Constitution's terms, all bets are off, McCarthy explained. So if it ignores the Constitution on voting qualifications, it might well ignore it on qualifications for office. That is why the state government should step in and clarify, whether by legislation or lawsuit, that non-citizens are not qualified to vote. Despite the fact that the legislation could have significant electoral consequences, voting patterns in New York City may not see much material change. After all, the city is already a haven of progressive Democrats, so adding more people who will vote for progressive Democrats will not change much, McCarthy said. Nevertheless, if the voting rights of citizens are cancelled out by non-citizens, many of those citizens would relocate to places where the democratic and constitutional rights were protected. That would further erode the tax base of the city at a time when a financial crisis is looming. McCarthy concluded that citizenship is fundamental to membership in a national community that shares benefits and burdens. Voting must be limited to citizens because voting is what determines the destiny of the national community. Those principles are rudimentary to a functioning republic. It is perilous that we even have to point this out, let alone fight over it, McCarthy added. The fact that we do necessarily means these principles are losing their persuasive force. It is hard to conceive of how we ultimately survive as a constitutional democracy if we lose attachment to the things that make us a constitutional democracy. Democratic city and state lawmakers cheered City Council's passage of the bill, which now goes to Mayor Bill de Blasio's desk for signing. The mayor's office did not respond to an inquiry from Fox News. In one of the most diverse cities in the world, we need to ensure that there is adequate representation for all New Yorkers. That starts by expanding the scope of who is allowed to vote in our local elections, New York City Council member Ardanis Rodriguez, who introduced the legislation, said in a statement Thursday. Immigrants in New York City own over half of the local businesses and contribute over $190 billion to the citywide GDP. Rodriguez added that more than half of the city's frontline essential workers are immigrants and about 1 in 5 are non-citizen New Yorkers. New York City-based non-citizens will be eligible to register to vote by December 2022 and cast ballots by January 2023. Undocumented immigrants will not be allowed to vote, as is the case for all non-citizen voting legislation that exists in the U.S. today.